Welcome to her Fireside Stories, where the shadows dance and secrets unfold. The crackling flames illuminate a story that will chill your blood, then warm your heart. Tonight's tale, The Inheritance. Imagine this. An elderly woman steps into a corporate boardroom, silencing every voice. The family members who left her for dead in the woods 3 months ago now stare in disbelief at what they believe is a ghost. "You look like you've seen the dead rise," she whispers, her loyal dog growling beside her. "Perhaps you have." How did she survive a brutal betrayal orchestrated by her own flesh and blood? What alliance formed between her faithful companion and a mysterious forest guardian? And how will justice be served, cold as winter to those who valued company, shares more than her life? The answers await in tonight's story of betrayal, survival, and the unexpected forces that tip the scales of justice when greed consumes the human heart. If tales of treachery and triumph in the face of impossible odds speak to your soul, subscribe now and join our Fireside family share, where you're listening from in the comments. I read every one, and the shadows are always listening. Now draw closer to the fire. Our story begins on a rainy night when a family meeting was called to discuss an aging matriarch's fortune. The ancient oaks and maples outside my rustic cabin swayed in a lazy symphony, their leaves turning ochre and russet under the late fall sun. A brisk wind rolled down from the ridges of the Appalachian Mountains, rattling the windows just enough to remind me that winter would soon arrive. My name is Eleanor Hayes. Though truth be told, I often felt more like a ghost drifting through this remote place than a fully present person. At 67, with silver hair braided down one shoulder and a pair of thick tortoiseshell glasses perched on my nose, I had learned to love my solitude. The past few years had been shaped by what I lost, what I chose to keep, and the surprising ways one's future can take root in the quiet soil of the mountains. I was once the CEO of a moderately successful logging company. My late husband and I poured our sweat into building that business from the ground up, braving storms both financial and literal. We nearly lost everything after a warehouse fire and a legal dispute, but we persevered. When my husband died 4 years ago, I had a decision to make: keep my 40% shares or sign them over to my son, Nathan. He believed he deserved control as if a birthright. But the company had been my blood, too. I had spent countless hours in boardrooms and in the field forging client relations and comforting anxious workers whenever the market teetered. Although my heart was soft, it wasn't naive. Something in Nathan's eyes had shifted over time. He became more restless, more grasping. I decided to hold on to my share. It was an unpopular move with him, and the rift between us gradually became a cold chasm. These days, my existence was anchored by my Belgian Malinois Echo. His ears would perk up at the slightest sound, and he was loyal in a way people rarely are. He always sat by the front door as I tinkered with my old grandfather clock or read battered novels in my armchair. This solitude became my refuge. I grew my own vegetables in a small greenhouse, tended a patch of pumpkins for the local school's autumn festival, and whittled wooden figurines to pass the hours. Despite the mountainous isolation, I couldn't entirely escape my old life. Checks still arrived courtesy of the company. Occasional phone calls from the board reached me, though I often let them ring unanswered. I felt each ring like a tether pulling me back to a world I had already lived too many times. I cherished this slow existence, particularly the crisp mornings when I'd watch the fog lift from the valley below. Sometimes I'd find small footprints around the edges of my property: raccoons or foxes, I guessed, but occasionally there were larger tracks, others living deep in the hills. Perhaps rumors circulated about a reclusive war veteran named Cal Dawson, who had set up his own hidden dwelling in a remote stretch of forest. People claimed he was a myth, though local folklore said he was an ex-Green Beret with the survival skills of a grizzly bear. I used to dismiss those tales until Echo would stand alert for no apparent reason at all, as if sensing a presence I couldn't see. But life taught me to accept mysteries gracefully. In the hush of one late afternoon, a truck rumbled up the dirt path to my cabin, jolting me from my daily rhythm. I opened my front door to find my son Nathan and his wife Delilah, standing there with tense smiles. Nathan still looked like the tow-headed boy I once tucked in at night, but I had to remind myself he was now a grown man approaching 40. Delilah, with her pin-straight hair and well-tailored coat, sported a polished look that stood out against the rustic backdrop. Immediately, Echo let out a low, uneasy growl, an uncharacteristic reaction that set off silent alarms in my mind. Delilah drew her lips into a forced smile and commented, "Oh, he's quite protective, isn't he?" They announced they wanted to reconnect and had planned a short hiking trip as a family. "Like old times," Nathan said, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. A swirl of concern and reluctant hope fluttered in my chest. My mind replayed the bitterness that had infected our last conversation. Nathan demanded I release the rest of my shares, claiming my mental capacity would wane with age and he could run the company better. I told him that I wasn't dead yet. The wound was still fresh, and here he was calling for a familial outing. But I tried to see a more hopeful angle. Maybe he'd come around and realized life was too short for grudges. Echo sniffed at Nathan, then let out a small whine that I interpreted as distrust. I bent down to stroke my loyal friend's back, reassuring him. "Easy, boy," I murmured. The tension lingered in the air like a faint electric current. Despite my unease, I found myself nodding to their invitation. Maybe in the heart of these mountains, we could find understanding or closure. A part of me longed for that motherly bond I'd once known, so I pushed aside my suspicions. The next morning, clouds loomed overhead and the temperature had dropped enough that I pulled on a thick beige sweater to ward off the chill. We packed water, medical supplies, and some food. Nathan insisted he had studied the local terrain that we might explore, an out-of-the-way gorge, or admire an old forest trail. Delilah chimed in wearing a bright smile that seemed too glossy to be entirely genuine. She brushed aside Echo's attempts to sniff her backpack and said, "Let's make memories, shall we?" Yet, her eyes darted around my cabin with a mix of curiosity and faint disdain. I tried to ignore the undercurrent Echo kept close to my side, as though anticipating something neither of us could quite articulate. We set off under gray skies and a crisp wind that whispered through the canopy of oak and pine. Every footstep on the damp earth resonated with a dull squish, reminding us that a recent rain had left the trails slippery. At first, I felt a glimmer of nostalgia. These woods had been my playground in younger days. My husband and I had once taught Nathan how to navigate these slopes, pointing out the safest routes and the best vantage points to watch the sunrise. With each step, Echo trotted near me, his nose twitching at scattered scents. Nathan and Delilah led the way, occasionally turning back to check on me. Their gestures felt polite but hollow. My apprehension only grew when we passed the well-worn trail markers and ventured off a side path I scarcely recognized. "It'll be a nice shortcut," Nathan assured, voice light. The terrain soon grew more rugged with scattered boulders and steep embankments. My breath grew ragged. I was in decent shape for my age, but every twinge in my knees reminded me I wasn't as agile as I once was. Delilah lagged behind me at one point, rummaging in her pack. I thought she might be adjusting her gear, but Echo let out a soft, warning growl. One glance at Delilah's tight-lipped expression sent a chill rippling through me. Minutes blurred into an hour and the forest grew denser, the branches overhead weaving a tapestry of shadows. Nathan stopped by a rocky outcropping, turning to offer me a hand. "Careful, Mom," he said, voice tinged with what sounded like genuine concern. "It's a steep climb." I appreciated the courtesy, placing my hand in his. That was when I felt it. His grip tightened, not to support, but to shift my balance. In a heartbeat, a sharp shove sent me reeling backward. I remember the terror that flashed in my mind, an impossible moment that stretched like taffy. My feet slipped on wet rock and my arms flailed desperate for a hold. I glimpsed Delilah's icy stare before the world tilted. The next seconds were a cacophony of pain. My body tumbled over the edge, slamming into jagged rocks as I plummeted. Something in my legs snapped with a sickening crack, and I screamed. The ravine's depths caught me in a muddy embrace, leaves and brambles tangling in my hair. My vision blurred and my ears rang. I recall hearing Echo barking furiously, but I couldn't make out the rest. My consciousness flickered like a dying candle. Dimly, I heard footsteps above me, hushed voices. I strained to listen. Delilah's words were distant but unmistakably cold. "We have to leave her." "It's done." Hurry, lying on my back. The cold dampness of the ground seeped into my bones. The tall trees overhead looked like eerie sentinels witness to my betrayal. Pain radiated from my leg, and when I gingerly touched it, I felt the warmth of blood. My mind spun. Why betrayal for shares? For control? Could my own flesh and blood be this cruel? At the fringes of my fading vision, Echo scrambled down the ravine, whining desperate to reach me. My last thought before darkness claimed me was the wild notion that someone else watched from the shadows, a figure shifting among the dense foliage. My dreamscape was a swirl of half-remembered images: Echo barking frantically, the crunch of leaves, the taste of copper in my mouth from a split lip. Pain kept pulling me in and out of reality, refusing to let me fully escape into oblivion. At some point, I became aware of my dog's muzzle pressing into my neck, his rhythmic whining a tragic lullaby. He nudged my arm as if encouraging me to wake up. Every attempt to move my broken leg sent waves of agony through my body, and yet my survival instincts urged me to stay awake. Time lost meaning. The sky overhead shifted from dull gray to the soft orange of twilight. Darkness would soon descend, and with it the temperature would drop. Bleeding and immobilized in a ravine, I knew my odds of making it through the night were slim. Echo tried to drag me by my sweater at one point, but I had to hush him. The pain was too severe to endure that kind of jostling. My clothes were soaked, stained with mud and blood, and I fought to keep my teeth from chattering. There was a moment I actually welcomed the idea of drifting away, to let the cold numb my senses. But a spark of anger flared in me, the realization that my own son and his wife had left me for dead. They did it with cunning precision, no second thoughts. If I let go now, they'd face no consequences for their heinous act. They'd claim my shares, my life's work. That fury fueled me. Sometime after dusk, while stars began to glitter through the breaks in the canopy, I sensed movement beyond Echo's pacing. I tried to call out, but my voice came out a raspy croak. A figure emerged, tall and silent. I couldn't see his face clearly, only the outline of broad shoulders and a wiry frame that moved with near predatory grace. Echo bristled but didn't growl, as though uncertain whether this stranger was friend or foe. Then I saw him kneel, his hands gently probing my injuries with surprising expertise. My pain was excruciating, but the way he spoke softly, telling me to hold on, made me believe rescue was possible. "You're in bad shape," he muttered, though it didn't sound like a condemnation, more like a diagnostic. He hoisted me onto a makeshift stretcher he assembled from branches, mindful to keep my leg immobilized. Echo barked at the jostling, but when the stranger turned to him, he placed a calming hand on the dog's head. That was enough for Echo to stand aside and watch warily. I tried to ask for a name, but the stranger's face blurred in my hazy vision. My eyelids grew heavy, and the last thing I remember was the sense of being lifted, cradled by the night, carried deeper into the wilderness. Meanwhile, miles away, Nathan and Delilah scrambled out of the dense undergrowth. They carefully wiped their boots on patches of wet grass, making sure to remove any lingering mud or traces that might suggest foul play. Delilah's eyes flickered with a lethal mix of triumph and anxiety. Nathan checked his watch, cursing under his breath. "We'll say she wandered off, tried to chase after Echo," he muttered, arranging the story in his mind. Delilah nodded, tightening the straps on her pack. "I'll make sure people believe she was disoriented," she said, adopting a sympathetic tone. Maybe the medication she was on made her hallucinate or get confused. They both knew that once they reached the nearest town, they'd make frantic calls to the local authorities, spinning a narrative about a fragile elderly woman gone missing. Their next steps were meticulously planned. They'd head back to my cabin, gather what they could to craft the right picture, an emotionally vulnerable senior, possibly prone to wandering. A sudden pang of guilt crossed Nathan's face. It was fleeting, but it was there, Delilah noticed. "Don't get soft on me," she hissed, her eyes sharp as flint. "This was the only way. You know what's at stake." She was stubborn, Nathan. She was going to let the company rot, or maybe find a new beneficiary. "We can't lose control to a random charity. Everything you worked for, everything you deserve, it's at your fingertips now." Nathan exhaled, shoulders tense. "I know," he said, voice tight. "Let's just make sure we get the paperwork done. We have to move on the power of attorney before the board starts asking questions." Delilah gave him a quick nod, reaffirming their unholy alliance. They might have faced one more hurdle if Echo had stayed with them, but the dog had darted off, thankfully. They thought, never suspecting he'd find me. They assumed it was a lost cause for an injured old woman to survive a fall like that, especially with the approaching cold, unaware that I was being carried to safety by a ghost-like figure in the woods. They walked faster, driven by the promise of wealth and authority. In their minds, the biggest threat was the clock. They knew they had to file certain legal documents as quickly as possible. Delilah had done her research, forging a few signatures, faking a medical note. These steps would be simpler with me declared missing and presumed dead. A cold breeze rustled the trees as if the forest itself disapproved of their treachery, but they pressed on determined. They never looked back. If they had, maybe they'd have glimpsed a pair of watchful eyes fading into the darkness. Because someone else, not just Echo or me, had witnessed the betrayal. A reclusive presence in these mountains, someone who had not only the skills, but also the motive to intervene, had taken note of their crime, and soon he would be the one to tip the scales. I stirred to consciousness in a dimly lit cabin, smaller than mine, but sturdier in construction, as though every plank had been meticulously placed for maximum protection against the harsh wilderness. My leg throbbed with an intensity that nearly stole my breath, but it was bandaged and splinted. A fire crackled in a small hearth, sending flickers of warm light dancing across the wooden walls. The smell of herbs and antiseptic hung in the air. Echo lay curled at my bedside, his ears perking up the moment he sensed I was awake. A man stood by a table cluttered with medical supplies. A tall figure in his 40s, I guessed, with a lean, muscled frame and a hint of silver at his temples. He turned, meeting my gaze with hazel eyes that seemed both weary and resolute. "You're lucky I found you when I did," he said, voice low yet gentle. "Name's Cal Dawson." My mind struggled to place the name, but recollections of local rumors fluttered in, the elusive ex-Green Beret, who lived off the grid, the ghost in the woods. It appeared he was real after all. Cal approached my makeshift bed with measured steps, checking the tightness of my bandages. I winced, but tried not to cry out. Echo nudged my hand, offering comfort. How long have I been here?" I managed to whisper. My throat parched. Cal poured water into a tin cup. "Couple of days. You lost a lot of blood. I did my best, but you'll need a real hospital soon. For now, you're stable." His gaze flickered with something akin to caution. "I know who you are. Eleanor Hayes. Your husband once did me a kindness after I came back from overseas. He said if I ever needed anything, he'd be there. I never asked for his help. But now I guess I get to repay the debt to the Hayes family in my own way." pieces began to assemble in my mind. My husband was known for discreet acts of generosity, especially for veterans struggling to adjust. How coincidental, or perhaps fated, that this man who owed us a debt happened upon me in my darkest hour. I recalled the chaos on that ledge, the savage betrayal, and the confusion that followed. Nathan, my son, he pushed me, I said, voice trembling with anger and heartbreak. Cal nodded as though he expected no less. He and that wife of his have been up to something. I've been watching them from a distance, not sure what their game was. Now it's clear a surge of pain tore through me, and Cal offered a dose of painkillers. You need to stay hidden, he said grimly. They've likely reported you missing, maybe spinning some story to the authorities and your corporate board. You show up now, you might walk into a trap. Give yourself time to heal and gather evidence. You'll need proof if you're going to take them down. My heart pounded not just from physical distress, but from the magnitude of his words. I stared at the rough-hewn ceiling, listening to the crackle of the fire and Echo's soft breathing. My life had exploded into shards of betrayal, but an ember of determination still glowed within me. Yes, I would heal, and then I would demand justice. Nights bled into days as I lay in Cal's hidden cabin, drifting between restless sleep and fitful wakefulness. Though my leg ached fiercely, each sunrise found me a little stronger. Cal turned out to be a man of few words, but every gesture conveyed a careful kindness. He'd gather fresh water from a nearby stream, hunt small game to make hearty broths that eased the gnawing hunger in my belly. Sometimes I caught him outside scanning the perimeter with binoculars, ever vigilant. Echo split his time between guarding me and accompanying Cal on short patrols through the trees. Occasionally, I wrestled with a swirl of emotions, rage that my own son would stoop to attempted murder, regret for any maternal failing that might have led him down such a path, and a steely resolve that I wouldn't let their crime go unpunished. In my more vulnerable moments, though, I found myself thinking of my late husband. Was it possible in some ethereal way he had guided Cal's steps? Perhaps it was just the romantic notion of a wounded mind, but the thought comforted me. Outside these walls, I could only imagine the storm brewing. Nathan and Delilah would be forging stories about my disappearance, painting me as a doddering old woman prone to wandering off. If I tried to show my face too soon, I'd be declared mentally unstable or worse. Cal was right, I needed concrete proof. The forest that had nearly claimed my life would now serve as my place of refuge and planning. Still, I did my best to focus on recovery, mustering whatever strength I could for the ordeal ahead. Cal, for his part, hinted that he'd kept an eye on Nathan's dealings for some time, suspecting foul play, not just in personal matters, but potentially in business. In hushed tones, he mentioned forging documents, suspicious meetings with shady accountants. A flicker of pain crossed Cal's eyes whenever he mentioned my husband. I was in a dark place, he said one evening, stirring a pot of stew. Your man didn't judge. He just helped. People like that are rare. His words reminded me that betrayal was equally rare, or so I once believed. But now I'd witnessed just how deep it could run. The day I managed to hobble around Cal's cabin on crutches felt like a small victory. My leg, though still bound by thick bandages and splints, was healing. Cal seemed quietly pleased by my progress. We devised a plan to gather indisputable proof of Nathan and Delilah's conspiracy. We had to do it stealthily, ensuring they never suspected I was alive and well. Relatively speaking, until the right moment. Late one afternoon, as a pale sun struggled through cloud cover, Cal showed me his array of tracking devices and surveillance tools, leftovers from his military days. Among them was a small GPS unit he planned to place on Nathan's truck and a specialized collar for Echo that could record audio. I stared at these gadgets, marveling that I was about to embark on a covert mission. At my age, I used to think my biggest adventure would be perhaps a cruise or an international vacation. Instead, here, I was an injured senior citizen plotting a clandestine operation to bring my own son to justice. You'll need a burner phone, Cal said, handing me a device that looked cheap and unremarkable. We'll use it to contact Detective Irene Rowe in town. She's been suspicious about the circumstances of your disappearance, but right now she lacks concrete evidence to act. We're going to give her that evidence on a silver platter. The plan was meticulous. Cal would track Nathan's movements, intercept his emails whenever possible, and record any incriminating conversations. Meanwhile, Echo would be our undercover agent. His presence near Nathan wouldn't raise suspicion if we staged a scenario where Echo returned home on his own. Then, at strategic moments, we'd capture voice recordings. It sounded almost absurd, like some detective novel come to life. But the stakes were higher than any fiction I'd ever read. I found myself poring over the legalities of my shares, flipping through pages of corporate bylaws Cal had somehow acquired. I learned more about forging signatures and falsifying power of attorney documents than I'd ever wanted to know. Each new discovery stoked the flames of my determination. One night, I asked Cal, why go through all this trouble? You could have just taken me to a hospital and let the authorities handle it. He paused, gaze distant. Men like Nathan have ways of escaping justice if they're alerted too soon. Money influence, it can muck up the legal system. You show up claiming attempted murder. They might say you're disoriented or you fell by accident. I've seen it happen. I also don't want to break my word to your late husband. If we do this, we do it right. Cal's hidden cabin also served as a training ground. While he wouldn't push me beyond my physical limits, he insisted I learn basic self-defense with a cane. The idea was both thrilling and sobering. He fashioned a sturdy wooden staff about the height of my torso and showed me techniques to brace my bad leg while deflecting an attacker. Echo, ever the sentinel, watched these sessions with a tail thump, perhaps amused to see me jabbing at thin air. Evenings were spent huddled over makeshift maps of the forest planning infiltration routes. We scouted vantage points near my cabin to observe if Nathan and Delilah returned. Occasionally, Cal would slip away under the cover of darkness, traveling the forest floor in near silence. He discovered that Nathan had installed new locks and security systems around my home as if staking claim. A hot rage coursed through me at the thought of them pillaging my sanctuary while I lay battered in the wilderness. Our biggest break came when Cal intercepted an email from Nathan to an accountant named Marcus Fitch, discussing expedited paperwork and acquiring additional shares. The language was coded but not skillfully enough to hide the intent. They were planning a major reveal at the upcoming board meeting, a declaration that I was presumed dead or unfit, granting Nathan majority control. Delilah's name featured in the chain as well, giving instructions on which documents to prioritize. Reading their words, I felt ill but also more resolved than ever. Meanwhile, we discovered my longtime attorney had been calling repeatedly, leaving voicemails on my old landline. She sounded worried, even frantic. Eleanor, the claims about your mental state. Their serious one message said, I need to speak to you in person. If I don't hear from you soon, I'm compelled to move forward with a legal hearing. My fists clenched around the phone. That's exactly what Nathan and Delilah wanted to paint me as delusional. Every day we waited was a gamble, but Cal reminded me that collecting more proof would ensure they couldn't squirm their way out of charges. One crisp morning, we seized an opportunity. Echo would carry the recording device into Nathan's proximity. Cal had discovered they'd be visiting my cabin to gather personal items, presumably to sell or toss. Echo's job was to approach them as if lost, capturing any conversation. It was a perilous gamble. If they suspected Echo was bugged, we'd lose everything. But desperation fueled our plan. We fitted Echo with the collar, making sure it looked ordinary. I cupped Echo's muzzle, staring into his bright, intelligent eyes, and prayed he'd return unscathed. Cal drove me a short distance through winding back roads until we reached a point near my cabin. I waited in the truck, leg propped up, while he set Echo loose. The tension was palpable. My heart pounded so loudly, I half expected the forest critters to scatter in alarm. Through a pair of binoculars, I watched the ridge leading to my front porch. Sure enough, not long after I spotted Nathan's truck, he and Delilah got out, both wearing grim, businesslike expressions. Delilah carried a clipboard while Nathan fumbled with a set of keys. Echo emerged from the tree line, tail wagging tentatively, as though unsure of his welcome. From my vantage point, I couldn't hear their words, but I saw Delilah startle, stepping back. Nathan crouched, patting Echo's side. My chest tightened with a swirl of emotions: anger, heartbreak, and hope that the microphone was picking up every syllable. They led Echo inside, presumably thinking the dog was alone and returning to his old home. Minutes stretched into an hour. The wait was excruciating. I stared at the cabin, half expecting smoke to rise from some new atrocity they committed. Then finally, Echo bounded out, trotting back toward the woods. Cal whistled softly, and Echo found us panting, but unhurt. When we played back the recording, my blood ran cold. Nathan's voice was as clear as day. "I told you, if this paperwork isn't ready in time, we may need to do something drastic. I'm not letting those shares slip away. If someone spots her alive somehow." Delilah cut in. "Relax, that old bat is gone. No one survives a fall like that, not in these woods. We just need to finalize the medical declaration. Once that's done, we'll have full control." They spoke of me as though I were already rotting in a shallow grave. The cruelty was stark, but it also gave us what we needed: outright admission. Alongside Cal's intercepted emails and potential witness statements from my attorney, we had a growing mound of evidence. Our plan began to crystallize. Let them think they've won. Let them step into the limelight at the upcoming board meeting and then reveal the truth with maximum impact. In the hush that followed, Cal placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Not long now," he said. I looked down at Echo, feeling both gratitude and sorrow. Yes, not long before we blew their carefully constructed lie to pieces, and I'd make sure the damage fell squarely on their shoulders. 2 days later, the forest was cloaked in the soft hush of early morning. I was feeling stronger, able to walk with the aid of a cane Cal had carved with careful craftsmanship. Though my legs still burned if I moved too quickly, I no longer felt helpless. We decided it was time to slip back into town covertly. The board meeting was only a week away, and Nathan was set to make a grand announcement about his new vision for the company. We wanted to ensure our puzzle pieces were in place before that day arrived. Cal devised a clever disguise for me: thick layers of clothing that changed my silhouette, a loose woolen hat that concealed my silver braid, and tinted glasses to mask my features. With a scarf pulled up around my face, I looked more like a rugged traveler than the once prominent Eleanor Hayes. My heart hammered at the thought of being spotted, but the alternative, doing nothing, was worse. We first met Detective Irene Rowe in a dimly lit corner booth at a roadside diner just outside city limits. She was a short woman in her 50s with a keen gaze that missed nothing. When I slid into the booth, she nearly jumped out of her seat. "My God, Mrs. Hayes," she murmured. Cal quickly shushed her eyes, darting around. Irene's shock soon turned to a steely composure. "I had my suspicions, especially given the discrepancies in your son's statements. But I need solid proof. Do you have it?" Without a word, Cal produced a small packet of documents, screenshots of emails, and a flash drive containing the damning audio recordings. Irene's eyes scanned the pages, the flicker of anger in her expression telling me we had enough to proceed. "We'll need to coordinate carefully," she said. "The DA will want more than just a confrontation. We should aim to catch them in the act, or at least ensure they can't weasel out on a technicality." We spent an hour plotting our next moves. The plan was simple but required perfect timing. Nathan would call the board meeting to announce he was the new majority shareholder. Delilah would likely attend to present forged medical reports, declaring me either deceased or legally incapacitated. Once they revealed their hand, we'd counter with our evidence, front and center with the local media possibly on standby. Detective Rowe would be present, prepared to make arrests if the evidence was as airtight as we believed. By the time we left the diner, the day had warmed enough to make me uncomfortable in my layered disguise, but an odd elation pulsed in my veins like a runner's high. For so long I had felt powerless, abandoned in a ravine to die. Now I was taking back control. Cal gave me a nod of approval, and Echo waiting in the truck greeted me with a wagging tail. The final act was on the horizon, and I intended to play my part to the hilt. That evening, I returned to my cabin under the cover of darkness, accompanied by Cal. The sight of it made my stomach churn. Nathan had left the front porch a mess. My once beautiful rocking chair overturned, potted plants smashed. A broken window indicated he and Delilah might have been searching for important documents. I fought the urge to storm inside, but Cal held me back, reminding me we needed to stay hidden until the proper moment. We did a quick perimeter check, disabling the new security system they'd installed. Inside, I flicked on a small lamp, revealing further chaos: scattered papers, cupboards flung open, dusty footprints trailing everywhere. My heart twisted in anger. This had been my sanctuary, and they'd treated it like a crime scene from some lowbrow heist film. Cal set about installing hidden cameras just in case Nathan or Delilah decided to make another visit. I retrieved a few personal items. I was sentimental about an old photo of my husband, my grandmother's wedding ring, a worn copy of Walden that carried my scribbled notes from decades ago. We didn't linger. The cabin no longer felt safe, tainted by their malice. Instead, we retreated to a motel on the outskirts of town, paying in cash to maintain secrecy. Over cheap coffee and the hum of flickering neon lights, we finalized every detail of our big reveal. While we couldn't predict the exact moment Nathan would spring his announcement, we had a solid guess it would be at the next board meeting 2 days from now. In the meantime, I steeled myself mentally and emotionally. Betrayal by one's own child is a unique agony, a heartbreak that defies language. But there was no turning back. Echo settled on the motel's worn carpet, his loyalty shining in his eyes. Part of me wondered if he sensed the tension, the significance of what we were about to do. Cal handed me a printout, an excerpt from the Hayes logging bylaws. There, in black and white, was the clause stating that if the majority shareholder is proven incapacitated, the next largest shareholder could assume control pending a thorough medical evaluation. Clearly, Nathan and Delilah aimed to exploit that. Their scheme might have succeeded if I'd never crawled out of that ravine. But now, the final confrontation loomed, and it was time to ensure their downfall would be as spectacular as their treachery. The day of the company board meeting arrived gray and cool, with a drizzle that slicked the roads and flecked the windows of the Hayes logging headquarters. Once bustling with the energy of a growing family enterprise, the building now felt tense and subdued. Employees who saw me in the hallway a year ago might have offered a friendly wave. Today, they hurried by with anxious glances. In the parking lot, I stayed inside Cal's truck, heart thudding against my ribs. My disguise was different this time, a conservative suit borrowed from a thrift shop, plus a wig of short brown curls beneath my hat. Echo lay in the back seat, quietly observing my trembling hands. This was it. Within that building, my son was about to declare me gone, or mentally unfit, seizing the 40% shares I had guarded so tenaciously. Detective Rowe was already inside, posing as a state official. Cal gave my hand a reassuring squeeze, then hopped out to slip in through a side entrance. The plan was for me to enter last, revealing myself only when Nathan reached the climax of his speech. Inside the boardroom, tension crackled like a live wire. Nathan, dressed in a sharp suit, stood at a podium with a projector behind him. Delilah sat near the front, flipping through papers. Her expression calculated. A half-dozen board members filled the seats, fidgeting with pens or reading from tablets. The room grew silent as Nathan cleared his throat. I've called this special meeting to address a pressing matter regarding our beloved Eleanor Hayes. He began with an insincere tremor of sorrow in his voice. It pains me to say that she's been declared missing for over a week. The authorities have searched extensively, and we fear the worst. He paused for effect, letting out a heavy sigh. In light of this tragedy, it's my responsibility as her closest kin and the next in line for majority shares to oversee the future of Hayes Logging. We all know how important stability is in times like these. Delilah nodded solemnly, as if performing for an invisible audience. Some of the board members exchanged uneasy looks, uncertain if this was a scam or a genuine moment of transition. Just then, Nathan clicked the remote, shifting the projector to display a prepared slide. To honor my mother's legacy, he went on, we'll be restructuring the company to ensure financial growth and modernization. I have signed documents from credible sources establishing my right to act on her behalf. A faint murmur rippled across the room, but no one stood up to challenge him. Nathan took that as validation. With these new shares consolidated, he said, I hold, do you now? The sound of my cane tapping across the floor echoed in the stunned silence as I stepped through the double doors. Gasps erupted. Delilah shot to her feet, eyes wide with horror. Nathan's jaw dropped. Murmurs spread like wildfire. She's alive! What in the world? I limped into the room, scanning faces. My heart hammered not from fear, but from a righteous fury that burned within me. The cane steadied my movements, and Echo padded by my side. Ears alert, I let the hush of the room envelop us, taking a moment to savor the shock on Nathan and Delilah's faces. Then I fixed my gaze on my son. You look like you've seen a ghost, Nathan. Delilah recovered faster, her voice shrill and stammering. This is absurd. How are you? We thought you were lost in the woods. We tried everything to find you. She flailed for a script that had clearly never been rehearsed. Nathan just stood there, pale as a ghost, his chest rising and falling in rapid breaths. I noticed the projector screen still showing some slide about new management structures. Perfect Detective Rose, seated inconspicuously among the observers, rose. Folks, I'm Detective Irene Rowe. I've been investigating Ms. Hayes's disappearance, she announced, flashing her badge. We have reason to believe there was foul play involved. She nodded to Cal, who slipped to the front of the room and tapped a laptop connected to the projector. The image changed to a series of emails, each bearing Nathan and Delilah's names, referencing forged signatures, power of attorney documents, even a side note about the planned accident. Gasps rippled through the room as the incriminating text scrolled by. But the real dagger came when the audio clip played Nathan's voice, as clear as though he stood in a confessional saying he'd finish the job if the paperwork didn't go through. Delilah chimed in about me being a stubborn old bat who needed to disappear. The hush turned into a cacophony of horror, disbelief, and outrage. Board members who had once been neutral erupted in shouts. Some glared at Nathan and Delilah. Others demanded immediate explanations. Amid the chaos, I advanced toward the podium, cane tapping against the polished floor. I broke my leg when you pushed me into that ravine, I said, voice trembling with pent-up emotion. I might have died if not for the help of a kind soul who found me. Is this how you intended to take control? By leaving your own mother to die like an animal? Nathan's lips quivered. He tried to speak, but no words came out. Delilah wheeled around, looking for an exit, but Echo stood poised, growling lightly, a sentinel blocking her path. Before anyone could bolt, Detective Rowe and a pair of uniformed officers closed in. Nathan Hayes, Delilah Hayes. The detective began, voice ringing with authority. You're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud and forgery. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Delilah screamed a protest, claiming it was all doctored. Nathan sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. For a fleeting moment, pity stirred within me, but I remembered how he had smiled when he gave me that final push. In the aftermath, the boardroom buzzed with pandemonium. Some members demanded immediate clarification, trying to process the fact that the presumed dead founder had returned alive and seething. Others stared at Nathan in disbelief, the betrayal too stunning to comprehend. Delilah continued her hysterical claims that the evidence was fabricated, but no one seemed to buy it. The weight of the recordings, the emails, and my personal testimony was too overwhelming. Echo bounded to my side, pressing his muzzle against my leg in a show of solidarity. Cal hovered near the laptop, systematically closing windows to protect the digital evidence from any last-minute tampering. Detective Rose snapped her fingers, and the uniformed officers hauled Nathan and Delilah up, cuffing them. Nathan finally found his voice, stammering, "Mom, please, this is all a misunderstanding." His eyes brimmed with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were of regret or panic. Perhaps both. I stood silent for a moment, letting the question of forgiveness hang in the air. But the raw ache in my bones, the memory of lying broken in that ravine, silenced any pity. As they led my son away, Delilah shrieked at him, "You promised it would be foolproof. You said we could never be caught." Her meltdown was pitiful, the desperate unraveling of someone who believed her illusions of grandeur would never shatter. Nathan just glared at her as if blaming her for everything. In reality, it was their shared greed that sealed their fate. I turned to face the stunned board members, bracing myself with my cane. "I imagine you all have questions," I said, voice quieter now, yet laced with the authority I once wielded as CEO. "You'll have the full story soon enough. For now, I need you to know I'm alive and I retain my shares." An older board member I recognized, Mr. Caldwell, stepped forward, removing his glasses. His gaze flickered from me to the battered cane to my bruised face. "Welcome back, Eleanor," he said softly. "We're sorry about all this." The sentiment was genuine, and for a moment tears pricked at my eyes. With Nathan and Delilah escorted out in cuffs, the adrenaline that had been driving me ebbed, leaving me exhausted. Cal offered his arm, guiding me to a chair. "You did it," he murmured, a small smile curving his lips. I nodded, but my mind whirred with the next steps. Medical care, formal statements to the police, legal confirmations of my ownership. There were so many details to untangle, but the biggest question had already been answered. I had survived, and justice was in motion. In the ensuing weeks, Nathan and Delilah faced a barrage of charges: attempted murder, corporate fraud, conspiracy. Their high-priced lawyers tried to spin theories of my mental instability, claiming my injuries were from a simple fall. But the evidence was undeniable. The forged documents, the audio recordings, even the spooked testimonies from a few confidants they'd bragged to it all pointed to one verdict. They were denied bail, prompting a ripple of relief throughout the community. As for me, I was left to reconcile the shards of my life. My 40% shares remained mine, but I quickly realized that holding on to them no longer felt right. My injury was healing, but the emotional strain of controlling a company didn't appeal to me anymore, so I did something bold. I donated half to establish the Hayes Evergreen Trust, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting elders from financial exploitation. The remaining 20% I held on to not for greed or power, but to ensure I had a voice within the company my husband and I built. I wanted to guide it ethically while stepping back from day-to-day responsibilities. The town's reaction was a mix of shock and awe. Reporters hounded me for interviews. Hungry for every grisly detail, I agreed to speak out a few times, chiefly to raise awareness about elder abuse, especially within families. "Blood doesn't equal loyalty," I stated in one heartfelt interview, my cane resting against my chair. My words resonated with audiences near and far. Donations poured into the new trust, and we began organizing workshops, training seniors in basic legal and financial literacy so they could protect themselves. Cal, ever the quiet guardian, stayed in the background, politely refusing press attention. But I made sure he got the recognition he deserved. Echo, too, became somewhat of a local celebrity. The mayor even insisted on putting up a small plaque near Town Hall, honoring my dog for extraordinary service in saving a life. In the photograph taken at the unveiling ceremony, Echo sits tall, ears perked. While I grin like a proud mother, Cal stands behind us, a ghost. No more, his presence finally acknowledged. Though life had changed irrevocably, I felt an odd sense of renewal. The betrayal had wounded me deeply, but it also cracked open a path to new beginnings. I poured energy into Silverwatch, a survival awareness program for seniors. Our workshops covered everything from wilderness first aid to self-defense basics. Lessons born from my own harrowing experience, Cal co-led these sessions demonstrating practical skills he'd honed in the Special Forces. Attendees were inspired especially by the living testament that a person of my age could endure such hardships and still come out swinging. Months later, on a crisp autumn day, much like the one where my ordeal began, I found myself standing at my husband's grave. The cemetery lay at the edge of town, overlooking a valley where the leaves had burst into a riot of gold and crimson. I leaned on my cane, Echo sitting quietly by my feet. A gentle breeze rustled my braided silver hair, and I closed my eyes, recalling the last words I ever said to him. "I almost didn't make it," I murmured, voice tinged with equal parts sorrow and gratitude. "But your ghost sent me help when I needed it most." In that moment, it felt as though I could sense his presence, warm, proud, forgiving. So much had happened since he left us. I wondered if he could see how Nathan had fallen prey to greed, how Delilah had manipulated him, or if he somehow guided Cal to my side. I placed a small wooden carving on the grave, one of the little figurines I'd whittled on lonely nights. It was shaped like Echo, a reminder of the dog that had saved my life. A lightness swept through me, as though I were shedding an invisible burden. My heart still ached for the future I'd hoped to share with my son, but I'd learned that my worth wasn't defined by who loved or betrayed me. My spirit was forged by my will to endure, to fight for justice, and to reclaim my story from the jaws of defeat. As I left the cemetery, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery streaks of orange and pink. Echo padded alongside, occasionally glancing up to check on me. In the distance, a lone figure stood by a tree, Cal waiting patiently. A wave of something akin to peace washed over me. Age was not weakness, I realized. Experience and the scars that came with it could be the foundation of one's resilience. Betrayal had cut deep, but I rose again, forging a new purpose in its wake, and I would keep rising day after day with every sunrise that illuminated the Appalachian Hills, forever changed yet unbroken. Eleanor Hayes taught us tonight that our deepest strength often emerges when we've been broken, when those we trusted most betray us, but our spirit refuses to surrender. Was it Echo's unwavering loyalty that moved you most, the mysterious Cal Dawson with his forest wisdom, or perhaps Eleanor herself, who transformed betrayal into her most powerful weapon? The shadows between the trees hold 1,000 more stories just waiting to be told. Next week, we'll venture into the forgotten corridors of an abandoned hotel, where a night watchman discovers messages from guests who checked out decades ago, yet somehow still remain. If tonight's tale touched your heart, that single subscription button keeps our fire burning bright. Your comments become part of our shared story. I read each one by firelight and carry your words into the next tale I craft. From this quiet corner, where shadows dance on the walls, to wherever you find yourself tonight, may you always have the courage of Eleanor, the loyalty of Echo, and when needed, an unexpected guardian watching over your darkest hours. Until our paths cross again by the fire.